50th anniversary. My name is Jim Loba, and I've got a assistant here that's going to help me, Mr. Jeff Baldwin. We're going to try in just a short amount of time to give you an appreciation for the artillery branch of the armies north and south during the American Civil War. That's what they called it in the 1860s, 3 different types of cannon. I'm going to talk about those briefly. The one on your far left is an older technology, and that is that particular piece is the Model 1857 light 12-pounder gun. It's a bronze cannon. It's smooth bore. It fires a spherical projectile. It is the older technology. In the middle, that piece is a 10-pounder Parrott rifle. Notice I said rifle. There's a big difference in technology and advance in technology. This particular weapon system has spiral grooves cut inside the barrel that can put a spin on a projectile. And finally, on the far right, we have the 3-inch ordnance rifle. That too is a rifled weapon. A good way to think of the differences between these two different and separately distinct weapon systems, because the technology for the far right two guns is essentially the same, is to think about the difference between the way a basketball goes through the air and the way a football goes through the air. The 12-pounder Napoleon, that bronze gun, is like a basketball going through the air, or as I like to describe it, a pea through a straw, a spherical projectile which goes essentially in an arc or straight line with no spin on it. However, the 10-pounder Parrott and the 3-inch ordnance rifle on the right have a projectile that looks a lot more like what we think a projectile should look like. And we are going to talk in more in depth about ammunition here in a minute. But the big difference between these two is that these black guns, or rifled guns, put a spin on a not a spherical, but a projectile-shaped projectile that makes it go further and faster and straighter. So think about the difference between these two cannon systems as the way a basketball flies through the air and the way a football goes through the air, and you'll basically understand the difference between what these cannons can do. In terms of their capability, if you look to your front and you look at that barn that sits up there on Cemetery Ridge, that 12-pounder Napoleon firing its round spherical projectile can consistently hit that barn. But these two rifles on the right, once their range is adjusted, can consistently hit the barn door. The first piece of ammunition that Jeff's going to hold up here is for the 12-pounder Napoleon. You see, fixed piece of ammunition. You've got everything there pretty much to fire one shot. Now, the business end of this projectile is that 12-pound iron ball. That's a solid sphere of iron mounted on the front end of that. That's what the 12-pounder Napoleon, as it's colloquially known, fires. A round iron ball. It is attached to a wooden block, and strapped to that wooden block is a woolen cloth sack that contains, depending on what type of projectile you're firing out of the Napoleon, 2 or 2.5 pounds of cannon-grade powder. That's fixed ammunition. I've got everything there. I only have to ram that cannon one time in order to set it off. Now, perhaps by now you figured out from this talk so far how some of these guns get their names. When I tell you that that Napoleon is called a 12-pounder, that's not because that's all that that cannon weighs. In fact, that piece of equipment, as you see it sitting there, weighs a little over a ton. But it fires a 12-pound iron ball, and that's what gives it its name. One might wonder, against those massed infantry attacks, what good is a solid iron ball? And the fact of the matter is, these two different types of weapons, smooth-bore and rifle, can be used to engage different kinds of targets in different ways. Now, if I wanted to try with a 12-pounder to engage another battery to disable the enemy's artillery capability, I might want to use solid shot. Or, and this is a much more dramatic way of thinking about it, if I fired a 12-pound Napoleon against an advancing infantry formation, obviously that solid ball is only going to kill probably one man and a man directly behind him. But if that formation was moving laterally in my front and I was looking down one of its flanks, I could fire that solid 12-pound iron ball and it would skip down through that long formation lengthwise like a bowling ball does in a bowling alley, and could injure or kill a significant number of men. One of the important things to remember about Civil War artillery is that the units that make up the Armies North and South are generally locally raised. That's why so many of these units have state designations. So chances are within your company, you may be standing next to cousins, neighbors, fathers, or sons. If you see somebody you've known all your life turn to jam by one of these things when they're struck by it, that's going to have a tremendous, significant impact on your desire to continue on with this fight. And the reality of the situation is artillery has a tremendous psychological advantage. Only about 15%, as far as we know, of casualties during the Civil War caused by artillery. The next type of ammunition we're going to speak to looks very similar from the exterior, from the type we talked about a moment ago. But there is a difference. This is called shell, or common shell. This is, again, a round iron ball, but this one's hollow. And inside there's an explosive, there's black powder, and more importantly, in the nose of that round spherical piece of shell is a rudimentary fuse. This is a timing device which will cause that shell to explode at a set amount of time downrange. The concept behind shell is, the idea is that you want to fire that shell and you want to cause that shell to explode downrange at a specific moment in time, hopefully just above and in front of your target, so that the target is sprayed with pieces of shrapnel, or the broken up pieces of the shell. Now there's actually a variation on this called case. Case is almost identical, with the exception that in addition to the outer shell, which fragments and inflicts casualties, inside you have round iron or lead balls which add to the fragmentation effect of this particular type of ammunition. That was actually the invention of a British artillery officer whose last name, incidentally, was Shrapnel. Now, I should have pointed out at the beginning that there are actually 4 types of ammunition that both of these, both smoothbore and rifle cannons, fire. And the next thing I want to show you is a projectile from a rifle piece. The 2 guns on the right, the 10-pounder Parrott and the 3-inch ordnance rifle, fire projectiles which look like what we would expect an artillery projectile to look like. And they also have the capability to fire solid projectiles, shaped like this one is shaped. Now, one of the advantages of the rifle's artillery system is that we can actually put a point detonating fuse in the front end of that projectile. The idea being that while the 12-pound shell and case fired out of a cannon will tumble as they go through the air, by virtue of the spin on the projectile, the way it goes through the air, and the way presumably it will hit the ground, you can actually cause this to detonate when it strikes the ground, which gives a little bit of an advantage to rifle guns. Outside of that, the 2 rifle guns also fire their own version of shell and case shot, which are essentially anti-personnel types of ammunition. Last but not least, the 4th type of common ammunition that both of these cannons, smoothbore and rifles, fire is perhaps the most dramatic type of ammunition. We like to use the term sinister to describe this round of ammunition, and that word actually rhymes with its name. This is called canister. Canister. And what you see is a tin can filled with 28 iron balls about 1.25 inches in diameter, packed in sawdust. Now this is the 12-pounder Napoleon canister round that you see here being carried by Jeff. And that's what makes the Napoleon, even though it's older technology, so effective on the Civil War battlefield, because this changes the 12-pounder Napoleon into a giant shotgun. When that type of round is fired, that tin can will disintegrate, and those iron balls fly through the air like a shotgun shot in front of the cannon. This is the most effective type of anti-personnel ammunition, and it's used only as a sort of a last-ditch effort against an advancing infantry formation. At least one reminiscence by a Civil War soldier said you could always tell when the artillerists switched to canister because the formation they were shooting at had over it a pink haze. And that's because of those round iron balls striking human flesh. Now, we're made up of upwards of 90% liquid. And when you get struck by iron projectiles, such as some of the ones we've shown you here, what takes place is really a hydrostatic explosion. So when those soldiers rode home about seeing arms and legs fly through the air, they weren't exaggerating. They were describing very accurately what they see. Now there is a canister round also available for the rifle guns. I'm going to show you one of those, and it's immediately obvious what the difference is, and that is that the rifle guns fire a canister round which is much smaller. By virtue of the rifle grooves inside those two rightmost guns, some people believe that that actually can put a spin on that can as it's being forced from the breech of the gun, which causes the spread of the iron balls inside the rifle canister round to be less effective. So that's the reason why we don't employ, or they didn't employ in those days, all rifled guns with that tremendous accuracy, because you need a 12-pounder to be able to break up those massed infantry attacks. And to my mind, the 12-pounder Napoleon the Bronze gun on your left is really the workhorse artillery piece of the American Civil War. We've told you about the ammunition. Now we're going to tell you a little bit about the how we set it off. We like to speak to modern film when we do these demonstrations. And some of you may have seen a film, I think it's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, starring Clint Eastwood, in which he uses a cigar to touch off the Civil War field piece. Well, the unfortunate reality is, while we're only firing blank charges out here today, which is roughly half of a service charge, and we're not firing a projectile, if we were firing a service charge, and if we were firing a projectile, you'd see these guns jump back each time they're fired, maybe as much as 6, maybe as much as 10 feet, depending upon the nature of the ground, whether it was soft, whether it was hard, whether it was sloping upward to the rear, whatever. Each time the cannons are fired in service using service projectiles, they have to be rolled back into battery before they can be reloaded. Now the thing that sets it all off is this little thing called a friction primer. It's a little brass tube. Inside, it has a friction compound, much like what you find on the end of an old-fashioned kitchen match. And below that, this tube is filled with a black gunpowder paste. When this wire is pulled through that friction compound, the wire is called a rubber wire. In fact, not because it's made of rubber, but because it rubs that friction compound. That's what causes that pop. And down through the gunpowder paste is a bang, and that's what sets off that powder charge inside. Tiny device sets off that great big 1-ton cannon with some regularity. Sometimes they fail. We don't expect to have to show you the misfire drill, but if we do, that's what we call the teachable moment, and we'll take you through that too. We're not going to fire those charges with projectiles because tour bus drivers don't like that kind of thing. So, but we will fire 3 blank charges, and without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and launch into that. And I will, by the way, I'll give you a cue when it's time to cover your ears, okay? One of the most commonly asked questions that we get doing demonstrations like this is, so how fast can you fire these things? And I always contend that that's sort of a question that comes from the 21st century mindset, which assumes that we have an unlimited supply of ammunition. That's never the case. But the reality of the situation is you want to take the proper amount of time and effort to properly point, not aim, point the piece at your target so that your fire is as effective as you can make it. General Henry Hunt, who commanded the Union artillery, directed that the Union artillery fire no more quickly than 1 round every 2 minutes to maximize the effectiveness of his fire. Can you fire faster than that? Absolutely, especially if you have to use that canister. You can probably fire that stuff as fast as 3 times a minute if you need to. Cover your ears.
Number 1, fire!